of people have problems with the church. Some people say they're spiritual, but they oppose any institutional church. And so the church appears like a corrupt organization, even dangerous one. In my case, even though during my childhood I attended Catholic schools, I did not have any bad experience with any priest or any nun. By the time I was a teenager, I was longing for a group of friends that were looking for God as I was. And so I turned into the church. I went to my parish and I found a youth group, and friends there eventually became my best friends. And it was during that time that I felt a call to follow God and to be with Him more closely. And so I decided to enter the seminary and to become a priest. And in the process of discernment, since I knew very little about the priesthood, I went to the public library to look for books about the subject. And what I found were books written by priests who were either disillusioned with either the church or with their own priesthood. Many of them had left the priesthood altogether, and some were unfaithful. Nevertheless, what I read did not disappoint me. I must admit that I was a very idealistic teenager at the time. I was like an infatuated boy with love with God, and my mother had tried to warn me that the seminary and the church structures were not rosy. She talked to me about corruption, sin. I would have to leave it in order to realize what she meant. First, I attended diocesan seminary. The first year was like a honeymoon. I loved it. I was just happy that I was there. But soon afterwards, I started realizing what my mother was talking about. I found that the seminary was really divided. A few of the students supported the teachings of the church. However, there was another contingency. It was kind of like a rebellious group, and they behaved in ways that for me were deplorable. And then there was the rest of the student body that leans towards this second group because they had some support from faculty members. Then eventually I joined religious life. My experience with the Legionaries of Christ was very beautiful. Here I did not face that division that I had found before. During most of my seminary formation, I enjoyed a very healthy and supportive structure. It was during that time that I was able to come out of myself and develop my personality, since I used to be very shy. There were human frailties, yes, but I did not experience structural evil. It was during my priesthood that I started realizing structural deficiencies in my congregation. At the same time, I also witnessed some deficiencies in diocesan structures. And then came the shock. The revelations about the life of our founder and his double life. I must admit that it was the worst disappointment in my life. I think that I can understand a married person and what he or she can go through when they realize that their partner has been cheating them all along. I had the opportunity to learn about leadership skills, and during that time I came to read a very interesting book. Of particular interest was this book called Managing Corporate Life Cycles from Ishak Adizes. Here the author described the development of organizations from the time of their foundation to their prime and then to their downfall. He described different ways in which breakdown can happen. I must admit that I've been able to see a lot of resemblance with church structures. And so, even though I have seen deficiencies in church structures, I do not think that we are any worse than what we can find in secular organizations. Here, I think a reflection from Pope John Paul II can be very helpful. He talks about that relationship between Abel and Cain, and how God asks Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he answers, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Pope says, yes, every man is his brother's keeper because God entrusts us to one another. And I think this is key. He says, and it is also in view of this entrusting that God gives everyone freedom, a freedom which possesses an inherently relational dimension. It is so important to understand God's plan. God does not want to save us without our own personal participation, our own communal participation. God entrusts people to people. Yes, God entrusts people to people. And we're all sinners, imperfect, frail, and with a tendency towards selfishness, betrayal. If God wanted a perfect church, he would have created institutions and put it in the hands of angels. But this was not his plan. And it was not the plan for the Old Testament, the people of God, the people of Israel, and it is not the plan for the new people of God, the church. Here, I call to mind, let's say a mother has two children. One of them is much older than the other one. And the older brother could be an example to his little brother, help him in his development. However, the older brother at times could abuse his little brother. God does not grant the same gifts to all his creatures. Some he has called to a special mission, to be light of the world, to be salt of the earth. To these he has revealed himself fully. He has shown them his love in a special way. He formed them into a community, a consecrated nation, a people of God. He has given them the mission to be mirrors of his love to all humanity. However, they remain free, and the possibility of betrayal to that mission remains in the individuals and in some structures. He did promise that he would be present in this community so as to constantly reform it and renew it. This is the church. It is an extension of Christ in the world. He is the head. The church is his body. Will the church ever be perfect? Never. The church is always reforming itself. Ecclesia semper reformanda. It has an inner dynamism for constant renewal because the Holy Spirit animates the structures. The Holy Spirit is like the soul of the church. This is why it has lasted for over 2,000 years. There will always be sin and evil inside the church. It could not be otherwise. Yes, we're called to call it out. However, we should not be so scandalized that we will leave the church. Is the church any worse than any of the other civil organizations? I call to mind a philosopher, Alasdair MacIntyre, and he called out the rationalistic morality of the Enlightenment period as lacking firm foundations. Yes, it subsisted with some traits of goodness because it was built upon a society that had Christian roots. But he predicted that when those Christian roots would succumb, this morality and these principles would fall into barbarism. And that's what we're living today. He was a prophet. I would provide for the same analogy to the church and to other civil structures of our times.